I'm in the heart of Brazil, and today we're gonna be cooking picanha 5 different ways. We'll be ranking each method on a scale of 1 to 10, and figuring out which is the best. And at the end, there's only gonna be one winner. Picanha is the tried and true steak of Brazil, also known as the rump cap or the sirloin cap. And well, it comes from the rump. It's tender like filet mignon and beefy like a rib steak. It's been popularized internationally by Brazilian steakhouses. Now let's get into the first method.
The classic pan sear. It's hard to go wrong with this. This is how I like cooking my steaks generally. Surely has what it takes to beat it out. Or does it?
Right here I have a beautiful piece of picanha. There's usually 3 veins in a picanha. One right here, and another over here. And from the 3rd vein to the end, this is called the coxão duro. And it's actually not picanha. It's much tougher and a much worse quality piece of meat. So first, we're just gonna slice through and take off the coxão duro. But since we're cutting these into steaks, you wanna go with the grain. Our final cut, when you actually cut off each bite of your piece of steak, then that cut will be against the grain. So I'm gonna cut 2-finger steaks all the way down. You can clearly see how the grain is running along this way. Now what's the second most important part of cooking picanha? This. This is not your typical salt. This is sal grosso, which is very, very large granules of salt. It's traditionally used in Brazilian churrasco, and it's what I'm gonna be using today. They don't completely disintegrate when cooking, and they'll have a nice crunch and texture. We've got our first steak here. We're seasoning it with salt and salt only, and then we'll head inside to do the first method of cooking.
And to do this, you just get a pan fairly hot, go fat side down with your steak, let the fat get really crispy and render out. Then you're left with this beautiful, delicious picanha fat. Then turn it on its side. I'm in the camp that flips about every 20 to 30 seconds. I think it cooks more evenly, and you get less of that gray band. And once the internal temperature reaches about 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm throwing in a healthy amount of butter and basting until the cows come home. Once the inside reaches 120 degrees internal, pull it off and let it rest at least 5 minutes.
So we're here with our first steak, the classic pan-seared butter basted. It looks fairly nice, good sear, the fat rendered well. Let's cut into it. As you can see, there's a little bit of a gray band, but nothing too serious. Let's see how it tastes. It's fairly good. Stayed pretty juicy. You can definitely taste the butter, but it's missing something. It's not how picanha usually, or how I like it to taste. It's still a good steak, and I'm gonna have to go 7.6 on the rating. It's time to get to our next one.
For the reverse searing method, this is different from the pan seared because we're gonna use the oven first, but we're still indoors for this one, and we haven't ventured out into the wild just yet.
Now we've got our second steak here. Season it up just like the first.
I'm pulling this
and then we're gonna throw this into the oven until it reaches about 100 or 110 degrees Fahrenheit.
So flip it halfway through the cooking and then pull it out of the oven and let it rest. Get a pan ripping hot, and I mean ripping. Then sear the fat cap and the sides until you get some nice color. Then chuck in a hunk of butter and baste. Pull it off and you're good to go.
Okay, it's time for the reverse sear method. And I like this method because you can really dry out the skin and get a good sear on it before you put it in the pan. And it's a lot more foolproof. It's a lot less easy to overcook it. Visually, it looks pretty similar to the pan-seared steak. I think there might be a little bit more gray band on this one. Surprisingly, the difference in doneness is a little more on this one. Like it's more red in the center than the pan-seared one was. Still getting a lot of butter. Most of the salt kind of fell off, I think. So it's definitely less seasoned than the first one was. Overall, it's still a good cook. I would like the fat to render a little bit more than it did, but overall, it's still a pretty good steak. Is it the best? No. What is it out of 10? I think a 7.1 is fair. All right, let's get on to the third method.
Well, that didn't go as planned. These methods are all right for picanha, but just if you're in a pinch. They taste great, but now we're going to the big leagues. This is where it starts to get interesting. There's no playing around anymore. Will this next method take the title?
It's time to get a fire going.
This right here is a Brazilian churrasqueira. This is like the holy grail of barbecues. This puppy can burn charcoal for days.
Okay, now we have to cut up the picanha for the espeto, which is the traditional way that they do at the Brazilian steakhouses. And again, we're cutting off the 3rd vein or the coxão duro. But the real key difference when cooking on the skewers is that with steaks, we wanted to cut with the grain. But this time, we want to go against the grain because when we're slicing it off the skewer, we're gonna be slicing against the grain as well. Now it's time to put it on the skewer. And we have to be really careful when doing this. So we're gonna do the skinny part first, the side that has the least fat. Gotta make sure you don't poke out your finger. And then the other side. And then slide that to the bottom And then you want to take the side that has less fat and stick it on your skewer, because the most fat will line up with the least fat. And there you go, it's all in our skewers. And now to season the meat again, we're going only salt. And just spread it evenly and on all 3 pieces of meat. Now we're just gonna take this and get in the churrasquera.
You're not gonna slap that whole puppy on the grill.
Every so often, I'm just gonna keep rotating it. And what will happen is the fat will start rendering off, and as you flip it, it'll start glazing the outside and creating like something like a rotisserie.
This one's gonna take a little longer because we're going whole hog style. Well, not really, but you get the point. When it reaches about 120 to 125 degrees internal, take it off and let it rest a little. Then put it over a tray and just keep slicing until your heart says stop or your doctor flags your blood pressure. The thinner, the better.
Now we have the espeto method. This is the traditional in Brazilian barbecues. It's got that charcoal flavor that everybody loves. It's got that showmanship where you can slice it off right at the table. It's really an experience, but does it taste the best? Very good. The meat gets a lot more tender because I think it's not as hard seared. It takes a longer period of time so the muscle doesn't tense up as quickly. This is a really, really, really good method of cooking. The salt stays on well. It's got these crispy little edges. I'm going high on this one. This tops in at 8.4. Let's get on to the next method.
Listen, this is a great method and it's currently in the lead. Charcoal cooking is a superior method, but does it have what it takes to hold strong to the last competitors? I'm not so sure. Now get that grill piping hot. Add more charcoal and fan that fire. Then get your beautiful picanha steak cut with the grain, season it up with our rock salt, add it to the grill, fat side down, get lightheaded from blowing on the coals a bit, but just let that puppy sear. Flip every minute or so and take off until it reaches 120 degrees Fahrenheit or desired doneness. Then let it rest and you're good to go.
Okay, steak on the churrasquera. Let's see how this one turned out. This one turned out really well. The fat rendered down really nicely. You get to slice it, so each piece has the perfect amount of fat. It's got a ton of charcoal flavor. Oh man, I would have liked a little bit better if it was sear, but it's so tender and has so much flavor. This method of cooking is phenomenal. I need one more bite. This is topping in at a 9.2.
And we have a new leader, and the steak comes in at a fairly huge lead. Listen, the skewer method is great. It is traditional, but it's just a little annoying. You gotta slice it, and sometimes you get too much fat, cut it too thick, you don't get enough fat or any fat at all. The steaks method could be the winner, but there's just one method left, and I think it has a real shot of dethroning the king. Now for the last method, we're searing the whole thing first. So we're gonna get out our picanha, cut off the bad part, the cochon duro, salt the whole thing generously, make sure it's looking nice, and then smack it on the grill. At this point, I actually started running out of charcoal, so I had to switch to another grill, but it's the same thing, and it's just closer to the fire. Listen, it happens, so we roll with it. So we get this thing searing, close to the fire so that the fat drips and causes little flames, and go until you sear the fat beautifully. Now remove from the grill, and now we're gonna slice it into steaks. And with steaks, we have to go with the grain, remember? Season again, and put back on the grill, rotating until you create this beautiful crust from the gods. Then remove once they've reached your desired doneness, let rest, and it's time to eat.
Last but not least, we've got the seared whole, then cut up into steaks, and then finished on the grill. This one might have a real chance. Searing it whole first renders a lot of the fat, so it might be even crispier. Let's see how it turned out. The inside looks nice. I think that it was a little bit more of an inconsistent cook. There's a lot more gray to the fat side, but let's see how it tastes. I think this is the best way. The fat is extremely crispy, so much more of it rendered, and it's extremely, extremely tender. It's got all the flavor you want from the charcoal, and it's the exact same as the steak, except the fat's crispier. So this one, out of a scale 1 to 10, this one's coming in at a 9.4. We've declared our winner. Seared first whole, and then finished in the churrasquera over open charcoal on the grill as steaks. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast shooting this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.